In the late 1920s, Ludwig von Bertalanffy wrote, "Since the fundamental character of the living thing is its organization, the customary investigation of the single parts and processes cannot provide a complete explanation of the vital phenomena. This investigation gives us no information about the coordination of parts and processes. Thus, the chief task of biology must be to discover the laws of biological systems at all levels of an organization." Hence, von Bertalanffy coined the term general systems theory, an interdisciplinary practice that describes systems with interacting components applicable to biology, cybernetics, and other fields. Welcome to our presentation. With this video, we would like to answer the following research questions. How effective is systems theory? What are its applications and limitations? Carl Ludwig von Bertalanffy was an Austrian-born biologist, born in Vienna, Austria in 1901 and died in Buffalo, New York in 1972. He had to immigrate to Canada in 1949, where he was a professor of theoretical biology at the University of Alberta in 1962. His scientific work includes studies of cell physiology, experimental embryology, pathology, and works of theoretical biology. The Bertalanffy family had roots in 16th century nobility of Hungary, which included several scholars and court officials. Bertalanffy grew up as an only child, educated at home by private tutors until he was 10. When he arrived at his gymnasium, a form of grammar school, he was already well habituated in learning by reading. His neighbor, the famous biologist Paul Kammerer, became a mentor and an example to the young Ludwig. Bertalanffy's main work include Critical Theory of the Development of the Forms, written in 1928, The Biological Picture of the World, written in 1949, and Perspectives on General Theory of Systems, written in 1950. In addition, his mathematical model of an organism's growth over time, published in 1934, is still in use today. Bertalanffy and his wife, Maria, had a son born in April 1924 in the Austrian Alps who followed his father's footsteps by making his profession in the field of cancer research.
What is a system? A set of elements standing in interrelation of among themselves and with the environment to achieve a specific goal. To give an example, a system is your own family. I'll explain a little more later, but your family is a system because each individual in that group interacts and influences each other over time, whether it's in a good way or not. Within the systems, we have two types of systems, open and closed. An open system is one that only interacts within itself, but is also constantly interacting with the environment that surrounds them. A family is an example of an open system. This is because the family not only interacts with each other, but also with the environment. Other examples of open systems are schools, communities, and even an individual. Now, a closed system is one that is isolated from its environment. We can think of a closed system like a thermos. Once a thermos is closed, heat cannot be taken in, nor can it leave the system. Another example of a closed system is the Sentinelese, an indigenous tribe that maintains no contact with modern civilization. They are hostile to the intruders from the outside world, and no one knows exactly how many of them still exist. Boundaries is one of the most important parts of the systems. Boundaries are, in simple terms, the borders of a system. They can be either very strict or permeable. They help define membership and information flow, as well as specify membership expectations. Open systems have more permeable boundaries, while closed systems have solid boundaries. An example of a boundary is how a family has rules. Some families have more or stricter rules than others. If you are in this family, you abide by these rules. Other families abide by their own rules. A human open system. The three simple steps: input, throughput, and output. As previously mentioned, closed systems do not receive any of these. They are simply stagnant or isolated. However, open systems receive input from their environment. This input can be information, goods, services, or resources. Now that the system processes this input is through the output. For example, a carpenter decided to chop down some trees to obtain wood, input from the environment. He then decides to build something with it. His decision-making thinking, the throughput, will be in a way that fits a specific goal and his values. In this case, he decided to build and sell something. Lastly, the output is what the system puts into the environment. Again, with this example, the output would be the finished product, perhaps furniture, that the carpenter puts out in the market. All open systems use this three-step process to interact with the environment. Repeat: input, throughput, and output.
There is also another part called the feedback loop. Feedback is one of the major concepts in systems theory. This concept simply says that not only will the input affect the output, but the output will also affect the input. There are two forms of feedback: positive feedback and negative feedback. Going back to our carpenter illustration, if his furniture was well received, then it is positive feedback and it will cause him to continue making the same ones to sell. If, however, no one buys it because they're too expensive or not stylish enough, then these negative feedbacks would affect his output. He might lower the price or create new products that would cater to the customer's tastes. Another example of a system is the medical system or the hospitals. As you see in the illustration, the input includes the demographics, health status, and insurance status of patients, availability of alternatives to patients, and their perception of hospital quality. Given the input, which is basically is the patients and everything related to them, the process that the hospital or the emergency department add to the input is called the throughput. In this case, they include the triage, registration process, care, staffing, specialist, and diagnostic services availability, and the IT systems. The output would be either they are admitted to the hospital or discharged from the hospital, or worst case, death. How the hospital continues to operate will depend on the feedback loop, whether it be positive or negative. With this, we see the constant cycle of the three interactive components of the system. Another characteristic of the system is that it is trying to reach homeostasis, balance, or the state of equilibrium. Systems are always trying to achieve that balance with their environment and will adapt if any changes happen. Adaptation is a fundamental process in system maintenance and change until equilibrium is reached. In summary, through the systems theory, we see that the components or parts and the whole are always in tension. What one understands and observes depends on where one stands in this complex set of interrelationships. In the face of change, the system retains its essential identity by creating new subsystems, revising relationships among the components, or creating new, higher levels of organization that coordinate existing subsystems. The ability to withdraw from certain goals or to engage in new goals based on feedbacks shows aspects of adaptability in order to achieve equilibrium.
We now come to the application of general systems theory. Although Ludwig von Verdelanffy was a biologist, his general systems theory was applicable not only in biology, but also in several other fields, like business management, policy making, and ecological system. Business management. The business organization is a man-made system which has a dynamic interplay with its environment, like the customers, competitors, labor organizations, suppliers, government, and many other agencies. In addition, it is a system of interrelated parts working in conjunction with each other in order to accomplish a number of goals, both those of the organization and those of the individual participants. Hence, managers are needed to convert disorganized resources of man, machine, and money into a useful, effective enterprise. In addition, systematic models imply an understanding of processes based on interlinkages between system components. The linkages may take the form of a flow of money, people, or products, or of a hierarchical or network based across system boundaries, thereby enabling accountability or check and balance through the feedback function. Second application is on policy making. Instead of simply focusing on one aspect, policy should be considered in a holistic way. For example, an area of concern is the connection between industry and the environment. These two areas are most often seen as oppositional, almost irreconcilable, with very different political constituencies. In recent years, however, the adoption of ecological causes has brought these issues into the policy mainstream, requiring policymakers to integrate the environment and the economic in new ways. For example, when the state promotes the establishment of a chemical company, it should also provide mandates on chemical waste disposal. This holistic approach would generate income and provide employment opportunities from the company and care for the environment at the same time. Consequently, care for the environment would mean healthy and productive workers in clean and lucrative companies. The third application is on the ecological systems. Yuri Bronfenbrenner developed ecological systems theory to elaborate and clarify the set of interlocking systems in which human behaviors take place. According to this theory, individual development takes place in a complex set of interconnected systems, some of which a person is directly participating, like the family, school, or workplace, and some of which impact the person indirectly, like policies, resources, or expectations. Both the individual and the systems in which a person is embedded change over time. A person is affected by his environment, and yet the environment is also affected by him. In this view, the self is a flexible construct, constantly being molded by the nature of relationships, interactions, and social roles. Concurrently, the self also influences the environment by modifying or altering its impact, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Now we will go over the limitations and critiques of the systems theory. We will go over three of the limitations of the systems theory, which are the sentiments, boundaries, and future events. First, with the systems theory, there is no allowance for human sentiments or moral judgments since it presumes a rigid determinacy in science. It is a technocratic ideology that is inappropriate to apply in biological, behavioral, and social sciences due to the scientific techniques and quantitative methodology portrayed in the systems theory. The principle of holism, which is the sum is greater than the parts, leads to the position where one doesn't bother with an individual but only with families. For example, the sentiments and feelings of individual victims of violent and sexual crimes are not given emphasis when they go against the family or society's beliefs. Instead of seeking justice for the victims, families might prefer to remain silent in order to avoid bringing shame and embarrassment to the family's reputation. A second limitation is that there is a fuzzy boundary between the person and the environment. There is a failure to clearly determine the boundaries of any particular system without leaving out essential elements of the system. In an open system, information and resources from the environment continuously influence a person and vice versa to preserve the system's functioning. The person has a flexible construct constantly modified by the social roles, relationships, and interactions. For example, a woman can be a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, or an aunt. All the different cells answer to all sorts of different social reactions. Lastly, the systems theory is incapable of predicting future events. Seeing how everything is interconnected, the results of trying to achieve homeostasis could potentially cause problems in another area. For example, in a family with two boys, the older son having behavioral problems, the parents might set new rules for the boys and the father spends more time with the older boy. The result is that the boy's behavior improves and everyone is happy until they notice that the younger boy's behavior has deteriorated. Therefore, the impacts of change on all parts of the system need to be constantly considered. Now that we have reviewed the systems theory in regards to the history, definition, applications, limitations, and critiques, we will leave you with this quote. We are seeking another basic outlook, the world as an organization. This will profoundly change categories of our thinking and influence our practical attitudes. We must envision the biosphere as a whole with mutually reinforcing or mutually destructive interdependencies. Ludwig von Bertalanffy. And here you can see all of our resources for further information on the systems theory. Thank you for watching.